Steve Schmidt from the FBI, who is the lead engineer in a group of engineers there, I believe. Anyway, he is here to talk about distributed denial of service, and thanks for coming, Steve.
Thank you. I'm actually going to continue to wear my coat today, but just because it presents the proper image, but more realistically because it's freezing up here. I want to talk about both distributed denial of service attacks and also just generic denial of service attacks. Set a couple parameters around what I'm going to say today. This is not a technical discussion. This is more of a policy and procedural discussion, one where I'm going to be looking for input from you. So the most important thing from my point of view is that if you have something to say about this topic, please do. What have we seen recently? We being the federal government, not necessarily we being everybody in this room. This is something I'd like corrections on, changes to additions, etc. if you have something to add. A whole lot of stuff. Whoops, we need to get on the screen here. Yeah. Which one is it? It's one? Okay, there we go. A lot of increases in activity recently being the last 60 to 90 days. It was a previous occurrence that we'd seen maybe one or two multi-hundred node network of DDos zombies or slaves in operation at any given time. Now we're seeing many more than one. Why is this happening? Well, increases in ease of use is my guess of a lot of the tools, so we can enable a lot more script kiddies to get involved with this particular activity. We've seen a lot faster spread of the denial of service activities and cross-sector application. What I mean by cross-sector application is previously the average attacker would stick to one particular type of activity, as in I know how to root a Linux box that's based on the Red Hat distribution, so I'm going to do that. This time actually we're seeing networks where we've got everything from Windows machines through digital Unix being affected by the denial of service tools, which bothers me a little bit because it means people are reaching a little bit further down into the bag of unfortunate tricks. This is the interactive part of the conversation, and I need help from you guys here is, what do we do about this? We being the federal government, the NIPC was set up by the president to coordinate the federal government's response to certain types of activities. One of the things that we do is respond to certain types of attacks on computer networks. Now, what does respond mean in the federal government parlance? It means that we collect information, we distribute information. Yes, I know the FBI is really well known for doing that part. But we also try and get stuff out to people who are the victims of these attacks. One note on the bottom, yes, I know we need to release source on the Find DDoS tool. That is a favorite topic in the government at the moment. This is what we do with a few of the issues that we're facing right now. Open amplifier sites. By what I mean by the open amplifier site issue is those who are familiar with netscan.org and the others that go out and look for directed broadcast amplifiers, whether they be technically correct or not. Is that something that's worth approaching? I've talked to a few of you in email about what's the best way to deal with that type of activity. Is it worth people approaching it, trying to get these amplifiers shut down? Typically, folks will send email to the owner or the registrant of particular either logical domains or IP space, etc., saying, hey, you've got an open amplifier site, shut it down. We all know how effective that is in a lot of situations. There is the possibility, if people think it's worthwhile, that I could end up having an FBI agent go knock on doors of registered owners of particular IP space. Now, whether that's going to be the actual user is a different story entirely. But at least it would start the process of bringing to people's attention the fact that these things are a problem. If you folks believe that they are not enough of a problem to warrant that type of activity, or if people would be received so negatively that it would actually hurt the efforts to shut these down, I need to hear that kind of feedback. Amplifiers that are already used in crime. This is a situation where, for instance, if we have an attack that's happened on, name your large site, or individual users at universities, etc., we already know where the network is of affected machines through investigative opportunities, through sources, etc. What do we do now? In red, we approach them in person. We'll go up to the registered owners and try and trace back from there saying, hey, who's actually got these IPs? and here's what we've seen, this is what has happened, you may want to take corrective action. Should we notify via an upstream provider? Would that be a more timely notification? It takes me several days in a lot of situations to get somebody out the door to a site to go visit them. Would ISPs, NSPs, you name the word we want to use for the upstream provider, be interested in that kind of information, that kind of notification? Is that something that would be a service to your customers? Would it be a service to you? Amplifiers not yet used in crimes. Believe it or not, the FBI actually does occasionally find out about these things before they're used. Typically, we'll find out about them when they're in the stage of building a network, so we'll get to watch it grow. As we watch it grow, we then have to notify all the people who we've seen the particular actors take advantage of. Is that something where it would be worth warning the individuals who are affected via email, a phone call, or an upstream provider? I'm including upstream providers in both of these things because I think the most efficient way that I can get information out is to a smaller group of people and let you choose what to do with it from there on. Is that something that's of interest? Just looking at this page of stuff that's up on the screen here, is there anybody who'd like to add to it, make comments on it? And if nobody in this group makes comments, I think we should take a caffeine break. More or less.
Hi, Rob Zarka, Chelsea Data. I'd just like to make one comment about this, and I think, in a lot of these cases, whether it's a distributed denial of service or, spam, one of the most effective tools is shame, and I don't see anything here that shames anyone into doing the right thing with their network. Netscan.org makes things known publicly. Orbs and Maps make things known publicly, and we have a place to point to and say, this person is running their network badly, they're not a good net citizen, don't be their customer, or, go tell them they're a bad person. And, that is useful. Obviously, it's limited, but it's a place to start.
Absolutely. Now, I can't advocate using one method over another, especially those that are commercially based. But I'm interested in affecting a second group of citizens. If you're sitting in this room, you already care enough about your networks and the way they function that I think you're going to pay at least the minimal level of attention necessary to them that's going to notice some of the things that you just discussed. What I'm interested in doing is seeing if it's worth getting the attention of those people who pay the money, who own the networks. You walk into the company that's got the IP space that's actually using it from carrier X and say to the management there, guys, this is not only a liability for the world because it affects the way the net functions, but this is a liability for you personally. Number one, because your information may be at risk. If someone's rooted a box, well, you don't own it anymore. Second is there's always the potential that someone will launch into civil liability as a result of the use of that network. That's a messy, messy issue I don't even want to get really near if I can avoid it. But us notifying people, usually us being, the nasty guys in the dark suits, usually has a positive effect on management personnel. It doesn't always, but it usually has a positive effect. We're bringing a problem to your attention. Do you want to fix it? That's up to you. But we're telling you there's a bad thing going on. Same way we do if there was a bad guy using their warehouse to distribute cocaine. They generally take a dim view of that kind of activity because it's not good for business. I can't believe nobody else has comments.
I do. Oh, good. Yeah, I think I'm not sure where the last questioner just went, but I think you might have misunderstood the question. I think he was talking about a public place like Maps, where to list these sites perhaps make it impossible for people to use them. Is that what you're thinking, Paul?
Yeah, I understand the background of Maps and Orbs, et cetera, and wanted to step away from that because I can't, for various policy reasons, get near embarrassing people in public. But I was also saying, while if I was sitting out there, I would definitely be embarrassed if my name popped up. But there are a lot of people, unfortunately, who aren't. And how do we get to them is something that interests me. Is how do we get to the people who don't care or who don't notice that they're up on those kinds of sites? I know that the federal government can't do that. I can't put up a mirror of Maps and say, hey, look at all these goofballs who don't run their networks well. So I have to take a different approach.
Hi, I'm Paul Vixie, and I started Maps. And We looked into doing a Smurf amplifier list some years ago. The problem being that the technology we use right now is all destination address based, and some buddies over at Cisco have been talking to me about a way to apply BGP filters to source address, which would be very useful for this kind of thing. And you can bet that as soon as that happens, MAPS will sort of step outside the mail abuse field and make an active list of Smurf amplifiers for exactly this kind of purpose. But to answer a question you asked earlier in your presentation, as far as knocking on the doors, I've heard about your jackbooted thugs, and I would love it if instead of knocking on the door, you would kick the door in and tell people to please close their Smurf amplifiers.
I forgot my boots, I'm sorry. Will wingtips do for now? Okay.
It depends if they're steel-toed. I'm Bill Manning, and I had the dubious distinction of having one of my machines actually land in RBL for the first time. And I was incensed for about 30 seconds, and I thought, this is really cool. Because I now blocked whatever the number is, 40 to 60 to 98% of the internet from getting to my machine for further attack. So I can, this is nice that the industry, or that the community is willing to shun me for a while so I can go play in my sandbox. And so if I leave that relay open, then I effectively air gap myself. So in some sense you could sort of turn this around and say this is a good way to get some well-deserved privacy.
The newest in security implementation. Become part of RBL. Okay, we got one on the go visit them side. There's got to be somebody in this audience who believes that anything that we do is not a good thing, and I respect that, believe it or not, because we need that kind of balance in society. And I'd like to hear from the other side, please. If people don't believe that's a good idea, and I'd like to hear the reasons why, because then we can tell management, bad choice.
Speaking, not for my, well anyway, I think what we often hear, think, and say is that the FBI response is so slow as to be not helpful. I don't know what you want to say about that.
Well, if you look at the letters that make up our name, unfortunately the middle one is bureau, and that is bureaucracy. But believe it or not, we can do some things rapidly when we choose to. It's a matter of bringing it to a high enough priority level, honestly. That's one of the most wonderful things about the organization is if necessary, we can have 10,000 people doing something. But the question is it necessary, and is it useful? So that's one of the things I hope to get out of today was, is this something where if we could make it a quick enough response, it's something like a list of amplifier sites doesn't have to be a 30-second turnaround. It can be something that's done over a period of time because they've been there for a long time, unfortunately. They're going to continue to be there. And as we get that reduced somewhat, I think we'll have a smaller target set to look at. The larger question is, and one of the reasons I'm here actually, is if I receive a list of new amplifier sites, new zombies, I want to find a way to turn that around within minutes. Okay, we have to go through legal hours. To get it into the hands of people who can get those things shut off. And that's one of the things I'd like to find out is there a way I can do that? Is there a list of contacts that I can use? For instance, the second to bottom point there, I've been in the other side of this audience enough that I know that abuse at a particular network is not useful in all occasions. Is there another way to do that? For instance, some of the lists that collected knock contacts. How many people would be interested in getting a phone call that was followed up with a fax? Those kinds of things.
All this sounds really good. The only issue that I have is that I'm concerned about the ability of the FBI to keep the people who interact on the internet and with the managers well-trained and well-staffed. If there's turnover, one of the problems that I've had dealing with is just that, we get people who really are spending their first hours in this field, in some cases,
just trying to do the best they can, but they're not well trained for the job.
Absolutely. We have a problem with training and retention just like everybody else does. And if Cisco would stop poaching our San Francisco squad, we'd be even better off. But in all seriousness, we do have a training and retention problem, just like everybody else who's got anybody who's worth their salt. We have some people who are fantastically talented and actually, believe it or not, for some unknown psychological reason, want to stay in the FBI as opposed to going and making money. But the way we approach that is to try and get them the training that's best. Our aim in that area, and this is diverging from my intended topic, is that they spend 20% of their time in training. And what that training should consist of is actually going where there is a good relationship between a company and an FBI field office and sitting with those people and doing the job. I don't hold a degree in anything remotely related to what I do. I have an economics degree, which means I can't even count money properly. But by sitting down and doing the job for several years, it was the best possible training I could get. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we need to get our agents involved in, is get them out there and say, hey, this is what my network looks like. This is the way it works. This is the way these pieces fit together. Because then when you talk about it later on, they say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Ma'am.
Let's see. If no one's going to get up and make the slippery slope argument, I will, about FBI involvement in technical issues of this kind. I used to think it was possible to separate technical from policy, political, etc. Then I found myself working for ICANN. I no longer believe that. As soon as there are mechanisms for dealing with these things, there's the problem of defining the scope. And it may look easy from here to define operational technical. It gets much more complicated very quickly as soon as you guys are involved. So let's be really careful about that.
And that's the kind of comment that I need to hear, is how can we draw the line? Is the line so blurry that we can't, that it would be inappropriate for us to do so? My object in this is to get something positive out of the exercise, as opposed to just waving badges around in the air, which doesn't do any good with this type of activity. So that's the kind of thing that I need to hear.
Carter Huopio, KP Inquest. I wouldn't mind getting a phone call at 2 o'clock in the night. There's a Smurf amplifiers there that need to be killed like now, and or getting a mail to abuse at something. It usually works in some places, even at very big operations. And second comment on the internet being international, and Smurf amplifiers or sources not always being over here or over there. What is the level of international cooperation on Smurf attack issues at the moment?
Depends on the country, which is an obvious answer to that question. But I would say overall, anything that involves system protection and infrastructure protection, we've had extraordinarily good results. Perfect examples would be Canada and the UK, just because of our traditionally good working relationship with them. We have watch exchanges in real time regularly with them. We see this thing that just popped up on a UK network in an educational institution, here it is, and they'll take action against it. It depends on the country, and in a lot of situations it's a matter of getting the people in that country to get in contact with our watch office or the FBI legal attaché office in that country, and we do have legal attachés all over the world, and saying, here I am, I'd like to be notified when you find something in my country. We do try and do a positive, go out, meet people, say, hey, we've got this information available, can we give it to you when it comes up? But as is accurately pointed out there, FBI agents in general are generalists. So it may be difficult to bring across the idea of the perfect kind of information that can be transferred. Overall, it works relatively well when we know who to talk to. And that's the key. We have no problem, by the way, if a knock of a company that's operated overseas is interested in talking to us directly and talking to them directly. I will tell you, we will notify the legal attaché's office, will notify the host country's government, because we don't want to have a government to private entity in another country contact without the host country knowing about it. That's bad for political reasons.
Hi, Avi Friedman from Akamai, which is my day job, and NetAccess, which is my weekend job. And I do run a network, and so I have some network-based comments. First, a little point of NANOG etiquette. I believe you're to say major router vendor and not Cisco when actually making a comment.
Oh, this is getting personal. They're
Okay.
taking my good people.
Okay. No. Major router vendor is the only approved way to refer to them. So I have a quick question, which is that one thing we commonly do when one of our customers is smurfed is line up all the Smurf amplifiers in a row and get them to smurf each other, because we have plenty of outbound bandwidth to do that with. So I was wondering whether you think that's actually something that's legal or whether the FBI would get involved in. And then the main point that I have, our position is, it is, of course, self-defense. So, but the bigger question is, it seems to me that the big problem is not actually Smurf now. I can filter Smurf. Yeah, people won't be able to ping some of my customers. It'll make my trace routes bad if they're DUDP trace routes. But that's not as big a deal as actually, non-forged source, or in some cases, or in most cases, forged source directed attacks, directed, IP attacks, TCP, SINs, ACKs, things like that. And, this is a very controversial for NANOG topic about actually having the government or someone get upset about the ability to send forged source and actually getting some shaming and other things going on there. I was wondering, do you see directed, broken into machines, directed IP forged source attacks as a bigger problem? And if so, isn't that something that would be even better to try to address somehow, although that is more of a technical issue and political issue?
Absolutely. The answer is yes. The vast majority of the attacks that we see now are not the traditional Smurf style. Smurf is just an easy one to point out and make an example of when we say, okay, should we do something about a particular thing? My personal opinion is, as long as there's a sequence of TCP flags that hasn't been exercised to find out what it's going to do nasty to someone, people keep doing it. Now, will eventually the protocols evolve to prevent some of that? Yep, but then we'll have new vulnerabilities pop up because that's the way the world works. Can we take steps to do ingress filtering? It's physically possible, yes. In most instances, people don't like it for one reason or another. I'm not going to get into that particular religious argument because it is to some people, and major router vendors have a hard time with it. But vendors. In seriousness, yes, the bigger problem now is not traditional Smurf. It is other types of attacks, and any situations where we get notification of that, and that's what I'm talking about with networks of amplifiers as opposed to the traditional Smurf amplifier. Networks of zombies, drones, whatever your particular word of choice for that day is. Those are the ones where I think we can affect the most change when we find out about them, is get the information out so that people can fix those boxes which have been affected. You know a speaker's done his job when someone's chin hits their chest. And I think that it's time for a caffeine break almost. Go ahead.
I don't know what even my answers are. I'll just toss out a few random thoughts on all sides of the issue. It's good to be notified when you've got an inadvertent vulnerability. It's so hard to configure some of these things correctly that it's always good to have double check. That said, it's not clear that the FBI is the right organization to be doing it. There's a chilling effect. I mean, a few months ago, I had to meet an FBI agent on a street corner. Nothing surreptitious or weird, just it was the easy way. And she had a picture of me that she used. She found a picture of me on the web. This is a disquieting feeling that the FBI is looking for a picture of me. But the alternatives are not necessarily better. You mentioned civil liability. I think it's an interesting direction I think we will be going down. I've written on this, but the insurance industry doesn't have the same legislative and judicial, and for that matter, media oversight as the FBI does, and regulations coming out of there are at least as effective and possibly more draconian. We don't want, Lloyd's of London banning end-to-end connectivity that's not laundered through one of their firewalls. And that's another direction things to go. So I don't know the answer to your question, but they're all good arguments on either side. I would point out that a list of, for example, Smurf amplifiers is a wonderful resource for the Smurfers. They find it a very useful place to go get helpers.
Absolutely, and all you have to do is look at some of the newer versions of Stockeldrot and the others that include, as pre-compiled options, some of those lists. The question there is the same thing as the open source question, is the same thing as a lot of other questions. Which is better? More information that can be nefariously used, or less information and hope to hide it? I'm not sure that in this case, protection through obscurity is necessarily the better avenue to take. I think that we may be better off by bringing the information to those people, and that's what I'm actually trying to talk about, is what is the best way to get that information to them, to get them to change their behavior. And if us doing it is the wrong thing, because it is outweighed by so many other options, fine. If we don't have another option, even though the one that I'm suggesting is suboptimal, we can take that step and see how it works. We're probably going to end up doing, based on what I hear today, a pilot program where we take a piece of the list that's in the U.S. and a piece that's overseas, and with some of our sister services in overseas places, go and visit the people and see how they react. And then come back and say, well, that was a really great idea, or we'll just hope that never happens again. Sorry.
Dwight Ernest from RCN. To that point, and to Steve's point over here a minute ago, regarding the appropriateness of your enforcement on this, I think that there is a
let me bring in here. For me, enforcement has a particular meaning.
Okay.
It would be sort of outreach or liaison or something like that. Enforcement means that
okay.
they're
The appropriateness of your outreach, let's put it that way. I think that there's a direct relationship to the extent to which you get brought into that outreach related to the extent to which unnamed large network service providers aren't cleaning up their act. And the arrogance displayed by a lot of unnamed large network service providers related to cleaning up their customers with open amplifiers is astonishing. And I submit that if we self-regulated better, that is, if the industry regulated itself better and cleaned itself up better, you wouldn't have to get involved, and we wouldn't have to be talking about buttering our own slippery slope.
Well, I'm going to say something that'll probably get me tossed out of the Association of Government Bureaucrats or something to that effect, but I would always prefer that you would self-regulate over getting us involved. There are a lot of things that we do very well. There are a lot of things that we do not do well at all. And muddling in the technical operations of networks is not something that we are interested in doing. It is not something we would be good at. And I agree that the best pressure is peer pressure to stop certain types of activities. Now, of course, there will always be the line drawn in the sand that says, don't cross this, please, or else we're going to have to come and be mean to you. But that kind of approach is probably the best possible outcome I can see, is where people get together and say, hey, this kind of activity's got to stop. Either that or we're not going to peer with you or something to that effect. Whether it'll come to that is a business decision, frankly. Does this do enough damage to my network that I can say not peering with that network is worth the cost benefit?
I have John Brown, iHighway. I would concur with the other gentleman a moment ago. One of the problems that we face in be it a Smurf attack or some sort of a denial of service, distributed or otherwise, is when we go to our upstreams is sort of the void of clue that you find at those upstreams, or maybe not necessarily void of clue, void of desire to take action and to follow it through. And I think we as an industry have to really figure out a way to beat those unnamed backbone vendors, or however the appropriate phrase is. Avi, if you want to comment on what that phrase should be. We have to figure out a way of convincing them that they need to clean up their networks and they need to educate their customers to get those things cleaned up, and they need to take it in a proactive. Otherwise, I think we will find that there will be a .gov involvement to a greater extent than what we would like to see. I think we have an ability to police that. We have the technology, we have the CPU horsepower, et cetera, to do that. What it takes is us making a conscious effort to go forth and to do that. Publishing a list is wonderful. As Mr. Bellivan says, it helps the Smurfers. It helps some of us that look at those lists, but when you have people that don't take any action on those lists, so what?
Absolutely.
I would strongly encourage, and I'm speaking more to the audience than I am to the gentleman on the podium, that if you run a net, make sure your network doesn't allow these things to happen. Fix it. And to say otherwise is almost criminal in a sense of association, in a sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've spent a whole lot of time talking about closing amplifiers and doing all the stuff that we should be doing in order to stop these attacks from being able to happen, and I'm all for that. But the one thing we haven't really talked about is what happens when the FBI, in cooperation with a service provider, actually catches one of these people doing one of these attacks. And hopefully other people's experience has been different than mine, but about 3 years ago I actually caught one, and there was undeniable proof that this particular person was doing this particular attack. And that was 3 years ago, and as far as I know, an FBI agent hasn't even been by to visit the person, let alone any kind of prosecution or anything else happening. So we're really sending a message out to the script kiddies that, well, go ahead and do what you want, because even if we know who you are and we catch you, nothing can ever happen to you.
And that's a definite problem. One of the things that I need to point out about that is the changes in legislation since then. A lot of what we previously did as enforcement action was predicated on laws that made it very, very difficult to, number one, convince an assistant U.S. attorney, who we have to convince to get an indictment or prosecution, that there is a viable case. The second is that horrific issue of damages. Most of the governmental prosecutive process hinges on the idea that there is a monetary damage you can assign to anything. And that's very, very tough in a lot of situations. What I would invite you to do is to email me anonymously if you wish, but otherwise, if you can, with information about where the contact was and that kind of thing, because I would like to follow up on that. Secondarily, a point goes back to an original comment that somebody made about training. A lot of the problems we've had that are very real, that you've experienced, have been directly result of sort of the cross-eye effect. You try and explain something to somebody in an enforcement position and their eyes go, heh, because they're not really sure about what you're talking about. We have been significantly changing the technical outlook on life on a lot of FBI agents. A lot means a couple hundred. In an agency that's got 30,000 people in it, that's pretty hard to get across the entire population. I would posit that if you're in certain areas right now, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, if you're in the San Francisco area until some large router vendor went on a party, you would have very good response to people in the last couple of years. There have been problems. Absolutely there have been problems, and absolutely there has been, coming from the other side of the coin, a lack of customer service. We are certainly endeavoring to change that, and one thing that's important is if a field office does not give you the response that you need, you should always call FBI headquarters. In this case, the National Infrastructure Protection Center is the party responsible for running field office investigative programs. I will say that as a whole, the field agents are absolutely wonderful. They have good people skills. They know enough about technology that they will at least not go catatonic on you. Are they the geniuses who can run their own networks? Some of them are. Some of them definitely are not. In which case, we need to get the people who do have the technical skills to sit with them when they're talking to you. And also, you can do a lot to help yourself by toning the information that you provide into such a manner that is comprehensible. It's a lot easier for me to talk about things with certain types of people than it is for other agents out in the field. You want to get something out of these people, so talk to them like you want to get something out of these people, as opposed to either they're the enemy or they're there to waste your time. I am truly sorry that you had a negative experience that way, and I would like the opportunity to try and fix it if we can.
Yeah, the issue in this case was the field agent was good. He understood the problem. He was good to work with, but he couldn't get anywhere because he couldn't justify the amount of damages, like you were saying. It was like a $5,000 number, and while we could easily say, well, we may have lost 1 million customers because of this attack, and that'll cost us way more than $5,000. That kind of reasoning doesn't count. The amount of time it took and broken things is all that they would count towards that $5,000, and we can only come up with like $3,500 or
right.
something, even stretching hard, fast, I can prove this amount of monetary damage kind of issues, and that was the problem.
Let's talk to Mark on this. We get the mic
Okay,
up.
yeah. Just to speak to that, the administration introduced legislation earlier this year, which, among other things, would have amended precisely that part of the statute to provide jurisdiction. It's 1030A5A is a particular subsection of the statute. It would have created at least a misdemeanor offense for less than $5,000, so it would have been graduated levels of punishment. That bill, I think it's fair to say, has really not gone anywhere. It was introduced by Senator Leahy by request, but it is not going to be passed this session. It's a problem we're aware of, and we do feel strongly there are a lot of offenses where even though the monetary amount may not hit that threshold, that there is a substantial prosecutive interest, and sometimes we just have no way under current law to pursue that.
You know, I mean, remember, in this case, it wasn't just that it wasn't that there's a monetary amount that we couldn't meet.
The method of calculation.
It wasn't a hard monetary amount. It wasn't a provable monetary amount, right? Because if you go and attack my network and maybe take it down for 12 hours, you know, there's lost revenue there, but the lost revenue doesn't count because I can't prove that I would have otherwise made that revenue.
Yeah, I would just say 3 words: beyond reasonable doubt. That's the hurdle we have to get over for every element of an offense. So we would have to prove that in a court of law, or at least persuade somebody's defense counsel that we could, in order to make them fold and plead guilty. So it is in fact a significant burden for us.
Thank you. Okay, concrete question time. Up here. If I were to have information that could be pushed out to customers of ISPs, NSPs, name your number, etc., would that be something someone would be interested in? You don't have to answer me now, but my email address was on the first screen. If you want to answer that, if you could email it to me, I would really appreciate it, because we can try and construct such a beast, a notification network, etc. We already do that in certain circumstances with our InfraGard program. And that's something that if people are interested, it's infragard.gov or .org. Moving information to ISPs more easily. I would love to have a useful telephone number / email / fax contact for any ISP that is interested. Useful. That means that I'm not going to send something that's going to end in a customer service department and be looked at 16 hours later or 20 hours later or whatever, because we already have those. So if you are interested in doing that, providing that information to us so that we can get information to you in a timely fashion, that would be wonderful.
There is, as far as I can tell, Susan is holding up a piece of paper.
So she can see.
Oh, I've exceeded my time limit on the microphone. There is no...
Bill, it's over.
It was a long time ago. There is no requirement, there is no expectation in any of the Internet documentation to stand up information in a who is or who is type service. And so if this community thought that an operational recommendation would be that there was an opt-in service where they agreed to run either their own data. I'm a firm believer if people own their own data that they tend to keep it up to date, as opposed to pushing it to some central repository someplace where they will forget about it and or somebody will start charging them to keep it current. That if there was an opt-in service that might get you where you want to go, if people thought that that was important. Otherwise, if I'm going to have to pay somebody to keep the data current in a whois database somewhere else, the likelihood of me doing that's going to be diminishingly smaller. So
I agree. Anything that gets pushed into a database is usually out of date as soon as the push is complete. I mean, all you have to do is look at some of my NIC handles, and they're a little stale. I think I've hit the end of the time. I'd be happy to talk to anybody who'd like to outside or in the back. And I do encourage people to email me. schmidt@fbi.gov is the email address. And for those who feel it's so necessary, I do have PGP keys up on MIT's key server, and we can exchange fingerprints if you're interested. That's it, and thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. One last statement, and I'll at least get some smiles. That's it.